huge event. It's a great lineup and huge amount of speakers for 3 days. I really appreciate to be part of it. So today I will start day 2 of the Dataverse Summit with my session, Build Your Own Dataverse Data Model, Understand Data Types and Relationship. Let me just introduce myself very quickly. So as said, my name is Jürgen Schleidorth. I'm a solution architect at Avanade, Germany. And for the past years, I'm doing also quite a lot of community works, organizing each month Dynamics 365 meetups for Germany, part of the organizing team there. And at the beginning of this month, we had our own Deutschland Power Zone or Germany Power Zone. And I'm trying to contribute as a speaker as much events as possible regarding the topics Dynamics 365, Power Platform, and especially the combination of both, like embedded Canvas apps and all the new features coming from the Power Platform to Dynamics 365 CE. If you like, I have a own blog, and after the Dataverse Summit, I will update the blog with some additional information about Dataverse and about the topics I will talk about today. And please connect on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any questions and want to connect. So as I said, today is the second day of the Dataverse Summit, and it's all about Dataverse administration. And I'm happy to join this summit and start it or kick it off today. So what I'm talking about today, about build your own data model in Dataverse, understanding data types and relationships. A little bit of the agenda before, so I will talk about where to start. So if you're new to Dataverse, how can you start with it? What should you be aware of if you're starting in Dataverse? Let's have a look at the Maker portal and the Classic editor and why it's important to know both of them. And before you start really going into developing your data model, understand the requirements that you have. We'll talk about a little bit about the common data model, about Dataverse tables and columns, and of course about relationships. So, but before we start, let's have also a little bit of terminology, because Microsoft has changed some names in the past year. So if you're working in the new Maker portal, you will see the new terminology. But if you switch to the Classic editor, or if you read blog posts from about 1.5 years ago, then you will read terminology that is a little bit different. So I will talk today about tables, columns, rows. I will talk about, sorry, I mixed it up. Choice and choices, and yes, no, these are the new terminology, and option set, multi-select option set, and two options. These are the Classic editor terminology, so I will correct it afterwards. And table is entity, column is field, and what I talk about row, it's a record previously. Most importantly, for sessions like these or for events like these, where you get all the information about theory, from my perspective, it get the hands-on experience directly after the summit. Make your notes, but go into the system and try it out. And Microsoft offers you different possibilities that you can start with Dataverse. So if you have an organizational account or a school account, you can subscribe to a developer plan, which is inside the tenant then of your organization, which is your own environment, and you have the Dataverse as well, and you can work on it. Or you can go, for example, to Office 365 E5 trial or to a Dynamics 365 CE trial. Subscribe there. And for the Office tenants, then you need to add the Power Apps license trial as well in the admin center. And then you are good to go for 30 days to test and try everything out. And my recommendation is do not use your production environments or tests. It's never a good idea. So have something where you can test try, and learn. And that's very important to have a hands-on experience after these sessions. So how to start? Or let's so I don't want to be the whole time in the presentation mode. So between I will switch between my presentation and the internet. So if you go to the Power Apps website, you have the possibility to subscribe to the developer plan. And as I said, you have also the possibility to go to the Office 365 E5 trial. That's a link I will share afterwards, or to the Dynamics 365 trial. And what I really like for the Dynamics 365 trial, you don't need a business email address. So if you have, for example, some Gmail address and you will try to enter with a work account, with a private account, then you have here the possibility, if you don't have a work account, to say set up a new account, and then you're good to go with your private email address as well, and you can create a complete new account for this. If you have your environment, and that's normally something that is done by your organization, the first step is to set up the environment to get started. And this you are starting up in the Power Platform Admin Center. And there you can click on the environments, click on new, and then on the right side, you have all the settings and 2 dialogues that you need to create your new Dataverse environment. And the main point here is you have to select the database for this environment. You have to give this a name. You have to decide the region, and that's the first decision that you're taking, that you have to do at the beginning, and you cannot change it afterwards easily. And the second, or the other decisions that you're taking is you're selecting a base language, which is very important, and a base currency. So these are the first options, and then you can click on save, and a new environment will be provisioned as a trial or as a sandbox, or in your developer plan. When you have your environment set up, then the next step should be go to the Maker portal, make.powerapps.com. This is the new experience that Microsoft is offering as part of the Power Platform, and make sure that on the top right here, you have select your environment that you created for your testing or where you want to work on. And I recommend, and I think it's enabled as a default right now, to have the solution preview on, because this enables you a better and new experience when you're working with solutions. That's the next tip, work in solutions. As you find the solutions at the bottom or left on the menu, and you can create your own new solution, and you can create a new publisher. A solution is a package where everything that you are creating in terms of tables, columns, but also relationships and applications, everything is packed inside the solution. And yeah, you have everything in one place. You have different options. For example, when it comes to create Power Automate cloud flows, there are different triggers than outside the solution. And everything that you create inside a solution is related to a publisher. So for the first time, you set up your own publisher. And with a publisher, you also create a prefix. And the prefix is used before any table, any columns that you will create inside the solution. And if you create choices, for example, the choices will have the value prefix that is related to your publisher. So these are the first steps that I would recommend to start when you are going to Dataverse and you want to create new tables or new columns, for example. So the second point I want to show you or tell you is that we have the new Maker portal, which you can see here, but with the 3 dots that are, for example, available inside the solution, you have the possibility to always switch to the classic experience. You can do this on the solution level, but you can also do this on each table, for example, and switch there. And why is it important that I point out to the classic editor? In the ongoing of this session, I will show you that there are some options that are still only available in the classic editor, or might be, or where you might be able to tweak some things that are not already in the Maker portal. On the other hand, the Maker portal has already some new features that will never go to the classic editor. So you must know both worlds to really have the full experience of the Dataverse and the possibilities that you have. So this is what the classic editor looks like. And on the left side, you have all the components inside the solution, and you have the same possibilities in the top that you had in the Maker portal. But as I mentioned before, and as you can see here, we are talking here about entities and option sets and not about tables and choices, for example. So therefore, it's a little bit of terminology at the beginning of the session. Just a hint again, as I said, not everything is available in both editors yet. So there are still features where you have to change to the classic editor, and other features will only be available if you're working in the Maker portal on the Power Platform. So, as I said during creating the environment, there are some settings that normally by your organization have already been taken during the creation of the environment. The region, language, currency, and if this environment should be enabled for Dynamics 365 apps or not. So these decisions are part of the requirements that you need to understand before you can start creating your Dataverse table. Why is language and currency important? For example, language, it's a base language. So when you create new fields or new translations, if you create a custom field and you don't have a translation in place, the base language is then the language that will be shown. Let's say English is your base language of the environment, and you create a translation for German, and one field is not translated, then the English term will be shown for this field or the English description. And for the currency, we will come to this later on when we talk about the different data column types. But currencies, you have a base currency in Dataverse, and if you set up some currency that are related to each other, for example, euro and US dollar, and based on your personal settings, if you're, for example, have US dollar in your personal settings, then the base currency will show the euro price, and the currency field which you enter, this is then showing the US dollar field. So the base currency, this is something that you can change afterwards. But Dataverse is more than just tables and columns and the information that you just already received. You have to ask you some questions before. So, for example, when we talk about tables, does your data have a date? For example, a start date, due date, or a duration? Do you need the data in Dataverse? And will you interact with this data, or is it just some information that you want to look at, or maybe interact on a higher level, or you have organizational access to these information? That's the next question. Who should have access to the data? Is it a specific user or team, or is it allowed for everyone to see the data, and how precise do you want to be there? What kind of data do you want to save? And is the data that you're using related to other tables? So if you have one record created in a table, do you want to access it from another table, contacts and accounts, for example? And then, of course, what kind of relationship do you have? What do you want to build with your with your data model? Last but not least, if you create new tables or new columns, you don't, or even if you create a new new environment, you don't start on a blank page. If you create a Dataverse environment, you already have tables always accessible. So these tables are part of the common data model where Microsoft is part of. If you want to get more information about the common data model, I would recommend to have a look at the GitHub repositories I've linked here. But if you create a new Dataverse environment, there are already these core tables available. And what are these core tables? For example, it's an account or contact with specific information that are already there. Then everything regarding system user settings or teams is already part of the common data model, and all kinds of activities like email, like fax, like task, phone calls. These are part of the common data model and of the information that is already prepared for you and that you can use or should use when you think about your data model. So you don't have a blank page, and always try to think beforehand, do I need, or does it make sense, for example, to use the account for a specific requirement? Or should I use a contact if I want to talk about this person type I have in my data model, instead of recreating everything new and have then these tables in place as well? And something in addition that you have to consider is these tables have already names, display names. So if you create your own tables, maybe with your own prefix, and as you have created them inside a solution with a publisher, but the display name, you should avoid to have the display name 2 times. So account is already taken, and if you want to use a different table with account, then you should at least rename the existing one, but don't have 2 tables or 2 columns with the same display names. And as I said, it's not only on the table level that you have already this information predefined by Microsoft. You have already also inside of the tables your different columns that are specified by Microsoft. And these are columns that are specific to the table type that we will create on the one hand. And on the second, it's for managing these kind of tables. So, for example, the owner fields are part of it, the creation and modified date on and modified by and created by fields. These are these information that are already created by Microsoft each time you create a table. And that's also the reason why it takes a little bit of time each time you click on add new table or add new column in Dataverse, because then in the background, if you create a new table, all these columns will be provisioned for you inside this table. So how do you start now to create tables? And I think I will switch now back to my environment. So I've prepared already my solution and my publisher. And when I click inside the solution, I have now in the new experience, I have on the left side my in solution navigation, where I can see all the different types of objects that I have inside my solution. And I can select, for example, the tables that I have added to the solution. And when I start with a new solution, everything is blank. What I can then do is, for example, add existing information from my Dataverse environment to the solution. For example, if I want to add an already existing table from the common data model, I can do this here, or I can create a new table by selecting new and then table. And on the right side, always these informations pop up where I'm asked about specific questions. And the decisions that I have to take is, first, I have to have required fields like display name and plural name. And in this case, it makes sense to have display name and plural name aligned to each other, because there are so many places in Dataverse where you have to either look for the plural name or for the display name. For example, if you're building a Cloudflow, and if you only know the display name, it's quite hard to then guess the plural name that is aligned to your display name. And by default, if you're entering your display name, Microsoft is pre-filling the plural name out of the box. And it's also adding in common terms the plural s, for example, and is doing there some things for you. In addition, if you click on the advanced options, the schema name is also predefined by the Dataverse environment, but you can change it as well. And also there, you should have a common understanding how you want to name your schema names. By default, Microsoft is just taking over how you have written it in the display name and removes the blank spaces. But you can change it, and maybe you want to start, for example, each word with a capital letter, or you want to have everything in lowercase, or you want to decide to leave out fill words. So it's up to you how you create your schema name. There are some limitations. For example, you're not allowed to have blanks or other specific characters in the schema name. But if you want to have everything lowercase, or how you want to handle it, that's up to you. But you should be consistent. So if you want to reuse, for example, the schema name in code later on, it helps the developer. Or if you're working with PowerFX formulas, if you're consistent in what you're doing here. Then the next decision that you're taking, and which you cannot change afterwards, is a type of the table. So by default, it's set to standard, and we are talking about the tables like account, contact, events, for example, that have no date and have therefore other specific characteristics. But there's also the possibility to have an activity table or a virtual table. And once you have decided to go with one of these specific choices, you cannot change these afterwards. So therefore, I recommend, as I said, know your requirements and know what you want to achieve with your data model. So let's stick first with the standard type. And then the next selection you can do is the record ownership, which is also a selection that can only be taken during the creation of the table. By default, it's set to user or team. And my recommendation would be to always, or in the most cases, leave it to this setting, because you can change to organization or user or team. And with user or team, you're not limiting yourself in terms of a security model, while organization, you have only two options. Either you have access to all data or you don't have access to it. While in user or team, you can be more granular and specify who should have access to this table. And how this looks like, let me switch to the Power Platform Admin Center. There you can navigate from the environment to your specific environment, and then the settings, you can select the securities and security roles. And I just prepared one security role for this event. And if I look inside my security and to my custom entities, I have one organizational type entity prepared and one user or team security entity prepared. And as you can see, the last two options are missing if I select organizational security, so sharing and assigning is not necessary. And if I want to give rights to this table, for example, I have only none rights or for the full organization, while if I have selected user or team security for this table, I can be very granular and say only this user or team, the business unit and child business unit, or the whole organization has access to it. So maybe you have to make more settings in the security model if you are selecting user team, but you are not limiting yourself during the decision how to proceed with your table. So therefore, my recommendation is go with user team. Then another one is you have the possibility to choose a table image. Why should you choose a table image? That's important when you want to visualize your data in a model-driven app. So in the navigation of the model-driven app, this image, for example, is showing up. And if you don't specify the table image, then always a little puzzle icon will be shown. And you don't have a visual help to find your table. So you can either select existing images, or you can upload a new image as a web resource and use it inside your data model. But that's not all when creating your data tables. Also during, or you have some options that you can choose during the creation or also afterwards, but some of them, and these are the ones with this little one icon here. So if you have tables like creating a new activity, for example, or can have connections, can have a contact email, where this little one is in place, these options can only be activated once, and when they are activated, you are not allowed or you cannot undo this activation later on. So know your requirements. Be sure if you want to have activities on your tables, for example, or if it should be added to a queue. These are the options that only can be set once, and afterwards you cannot undo it, and you have to delete your whole table with all. First you have to remove all dependencies that you're creating, and then you can delete the table and create the table again. So it's a lot of effort if you do the wrong choice at the beginning. Therefore, be precise what you want to have. Okay, let me have a look at my presentation. I think it's set already. Here you can see how it looks like in the navigation menu of the model-driven app when I select an image or when I don't select an image, and this puzzle icon here, This is the default image that will be shown for every entity or every table in the navigation bar. So I strongly recommend to have your own or the default pictures in use, so you can differentiate the tables also visually and not by the name only. Yeah, here are the hint that Microsoft has put also on the creation dialog, and it's really important to know, especially for this red marked options, if you need them, and if you're in doubt, don't activate them and wait if the requirement occurs or does not occur. When creating your table, you also have a primary column as a second option. And by default, the primary column is always set to name, but you can change it. And you also can change the column requirement. But it's not recommended to change the requirement because this first column is often used in lots of views, for example, and it's better to have, for example, some logic to automatically name this column instead of setting it in the requirement to optional. By default, you don't have the possibility to change the type of the primary column, at least not at this point. During the creation, you only can change the name and the schema name. Once you have set the schema name, you cannot change it later on. So if you leave it here to name, it's always the schema name is name. You can change the display name later on in the settings of this column, but the schema name is set and you cannot change it later on. As I said, you cannot change it at this position, but when you are inside the table and you have a look at the name field, then you have the possibility now to change the data type of this field later on. But there you are also limited to have either a text or an auto number field where you can specify how the auto number is generated. Okay. Then the second option, when you're creating a table, it's a type of activity. So an activity, as the name said, is something that what you are doing. The examples that Microsoft are providing as in the common data model are emails, tasks, mail. But what's missing, for example, is some mobile communication activities like SMS. So it's in some cases it's very common to have this kind of activity table created. And what happens when you select the activity type? First, the record ownership is always set to user or team. You cannot deselect or change the selection to organization because for activities, it's always specified by Microsoft to have it as an activity, the activity as a user or team. The next thing is that the primary column is always specified by Microsoft to be a subject with a specific number of characters, and you cannot change it because they have a common set of columns for each activity entity. So all activities can be shown in one common view. So they have some specific fields for all activities, like the subject, but also like start date, end date, duration. This is provided by Microsoft each time you're creating an activity entity. By selecting display and activity menus, this option, then, for example, on the form of, for example, the account, you have the timeline activated. That's always activated when you enable your standard tables for activities. Then you can add a timeline to your form, or also an activity subgrid. And then inside this plus icon, for example, your custom entity is shown if you activate this menu icon. In some cases, it's recommended to not activate it. For example, if you only want to create a specific activity, for example, by a plugin or by other logic, and you don't want to allow the user to create manually a specific activity. And as I said, there's a specific activity table and view available, and inside this view, then your custom activities are also included, and you can find these under the other activities by default. And you can also select these in the activity type. So there are some differentiations between standard table and activity table, and you need to know your requirements. So if it is a activity, does it make sense to also have an activity table, because you need the start date, the end date, the subject, and also even if it's an activity, you have to be sure about the security, because if you select an entity to be an activity type, then the security for all activities is the same. So you cannot differentiate between, for example, emails, phone calls, and your new custom activities. So all rights that you allow, for example, for a phone call or for an email, these are directly set for the new custom activities as well. So if you're not happy with this, then maybe it's a better option to go with a standard table and add some other fields, and don't have the possibility to add it to the activity view, but security should always be considered during the creation of a table. When I have created my table, as I said, Microsoft out of the box provides a list of predefined columns that are available for each table. They are differentiating between standard tables and activity tables. And in the standard table, you have, for example, the created and modified columns, while in the activity, I have to look at it in my environment. One moment. Let's open it up. While in the activity table, you have a lot of different columns, like actual start and end, the duration, due date. This is always created when you select the activity type of a table. Let's move on to the columns. So inside the table, you then have the possibility to create different kind of columns. So if you want to add information to your table, you're not limited to the information Microsoft provides you, but you can create your own columns. And there are a lot of choices that you where you can select the data type of which kind of field or which kind of column you want to use. Microsoft has grouped them a little bit. And for example, at the top, you have different kind of text columns. The first two are differentiating about the length of characters that is allowed and how they are displayed later on. if you put them on a form, if it's a single line field or if it's text box. With the next ones, these are mostly these are single line fields, but they have some checks included. For example, if you select the email field and you want to enter information to this field, the field is automatically checking if an @ sign is included and if it has the ending dot and some kind of domain name. So you're forced to use this specific kind of column setting that is predefined. Or when you select the auto number option, then you have the possibility to define how this auto number will look like. You have the preview in the bottom here on the right. And for example, you can say it's a string prefix number or a date prefix number. You can then specify how the date or string should look like and how many digits you want to add by default and what is your starting value. But you also can be very custom and, for example, make changes here to the different options that Microsoft is providing you and have your own auto number that is generated. Then there are different text fields or language fields. Due to the amount of time, I will skip this and go on with the date and time values, where you have the option to use date and time or date only. And with these date fields, you have also the option to select the behavior. So, for example, if your user time zone is included in the display of the date, or if it's a time zone independent date. So that's especially interesting if you have a date which or something that should occur globally at the same time, like sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I'm missing the word here. You must be you must know your requirement here. If you want it to be calculated on your local time, or if it should be time zone independent and show it for globally for the same time everywhere. Then we have the differentiation between choice and choices, and you have a predefined set of global choices that Microsoft offers you, but you can also create your new choice where you can add the values that you want to have inside your global option set. And Microsoft has set it by default to be a global option set, and this would be my recommendation as well. Even though also in the new Maker portal, you still have the option to go with a local choice. So in the classic editor, the local option set is a setting that has been predefined. In the new Maker portal, the global choice is the one. And what you benefit from is if you know, or if you unsure if you want to reuse the values in the option set again on different tables, select the global choice, because then you have to define it only once, and you can be sure that if you reuse the option set or the choices, that they have the same value behind. And for example, if you're doing a mappings relationship, that is working if you use the same global choice. In addition, you also have the currency field, which I talked about before. The currency is really related to calculating money values, currencies, and it's aligned to the currency table that Microsoft provides as part of the Dataverse settings. So if I'm going to the environment settings of my environment, then I have here my currencies. And inside the currencies, I have to define which currencies should be available in my environment and how also what the exchange rate looks like. So it's a setting that I do manually in Dynamics 365C. And for example, today, euro to US dollar conversion rate is €1 equals to $1.13. So if my personal settings in an application are set to dollar, then the base currency will be calculated to euro as it's set to the base currency of the environment. And for example, if I enter $100 in a table, then I will see that there are 88 euros in the base currency. Let me show it to you. I think I have prepared it already here. So I have here the currency field, and I'm currently I have set up my user to be in dollars. And if I now save my record, then it's automatically created in the backend the base currency amount for the specific environment. Okay. Then a different specific kind of field or a column is a customer column. This is a polymorphic lookup column, which is defined by Microsoft, or multi-table lookup. So the customer field relates to the account or contact table. So you can decide if the customer is either a person or an organization. And that is one of some out-of-the-box polymorphic lookup fields that Microsoft is providing. Another one is, for example, the owner field, where you can select if the owner of a record is from the system user table or from the team table. But at the end, I will show you a slide that at least in preview, you have now the possibility to create your own custom polymorphic lookup fields if you like to. Then you have the lookups, which are related to the relationships, which is my next topic. And you have the Boolean yes/no field, which is a specific type of the choice field. And there's also the recommendation to know your requirement if you want or if you need, for example, an empty value or yes and no value. So I've talked a lot about the tables and columns yet. The next very important step is to know the relationships. And out of Microsoft offers you 3 types of relationships: the many-to-one, the one-to-many, and the many-to-many relationships. Many-to-one, for example, if you stick with account and contacts, then if you're on the account table, one account can have many contacts, for example, or on the other way around, then many contacts can be related to one account. Many-to-many on the other hand, this would be, for example, if you look at this Dataverse Summit, then we have, for example, a session can have, or one session can relate, for example, to several different events. For example, if some speakers are talking about the same topic in different events. And on the other hand, this event can have several sessions. So then we have many-to-many relationships. And what happens if I select the many-to-many relationship, out of the box, Microsoft creates in the background an intersect table. But this is not accessible for me. So I cannot add any data to these out-of-the-box intersect tables. So if I have the need to enter their additional fields to this intersect table, I need to create my own custom many-to-many relationship by having a one-to-many relationship to the intersect table that I create manually, and then many-to-one relationship again to the second table. When I create these relationships, I have to select to which table I want to relate to, and select the session here. Then I can specify the name of the lookup table out of the box, and as always, the schema name is not editable afterwards. The lookup name I can edit afterwards in my columns, and I have a relationship name, and I can during the creation process I can change the relationship name if I want to. So, example, I can remove my prefix so it's better readable, and sometimes it's too long and not everything is shown. So I have the option to create a specific name. And I also have the option to have in the advanced options to set the behavior of the relationship. Out of the box, it's set to referential. So I can look up and interact with the table on the other side, but not everything that I do to my parent record is automatically done to the related record. If I want this behavior, I have to change it to parental. But be aware, for example, this means if I change the owner of an account and my relationship to, for example, to the activities is set to parental, all activity records that have been created, or all contacts, if it's a parental relationships, all contacts that are related to this account, the owner will be changed as well, for example. So you must really be aware what the behavior type means. And if you have specific requirements, you can always choose custom, and then you can define how specific operations like delete, share, unshare, and assign should be handled. So there you have, for example, if you delete the parent record, you can still say cascade all is then what happens with parental. Remove link would mean that if you delete the parent, or if you delete the one record, then the link to the related record will be removed. And if you click on restrict, this means that you are not allowed to delete the related record, that you're not allowed to delete this record as long as you have related records aligned to it. So these are the types of relationships that you can use to build your data model, and to make these relationships visible, you have two types of options on the form. That's the last point I'm talking about. So if you're on a form and you want to show the lookup field is just shown as a normal field. But if you want to show your one-to-many records and you want to add the many records to the page, you have to select the subgrid option, and there you can select show my related records, for example. Then you select the relationships that you have just created, for example, the SMS, and then only the SMS are shown in this subgrid that are related to this specific account. Okay. So at last, there are some formats that you cannot access directly from Dataverse. So you need additional tools like the XM Toolbox, and maybe someone is talking about it today as well. If you want to exchange, for example, a text field to a JSON field or a rich text field, then you have the possibility to use a Dataverse format changer. Or as I said before, there's a polymorphic lookup at the moment and in the preview. And there's a polymorphic lookup manager in the XM Toolbox as well, where you can create your own custom polymorphic lookup, which means you can, for example, have a lookup that relates to contacts and system users or leads, for example. And in Dataverse for Teams, we currently have PowerFX or formula columns that allow the usage of PowerFX inside the column. So that's from my side. Many thanks for joining this session, and have you have a great time today in the Dataverse session. And everyone who joined the Powerton at the beginning of the month knows that my colleagues and I are looking forward to have to compensate the carbon outcome of also from online sessions. So also for this session, a tree has been planted. If you follow us, you will see it every time that we speak. And many thanks. If you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Hågen. Thank you for joining us from Germany today and kicking off today's series of sessions. So we are at the end of the hour, which takes us on nicely to the next